Hi guys, this is Susan. Today I'm gonna go ahead and show you how to read CSV files from using CSV module in Python and then create or export some other CSV files based on extracted data or information. So right now I have 3 CSV files and a small project that I have written here. So basically what we're doing is we have 3 different CSV files. An employee.csv, it has an ID for an employee, the first and last name and the city. And then we have employer.csv. So employer.csv contains the same IDs for these employees, and it shows the employer for each employee from this employee.csv file. For example, if I have 99887744 Mohammed Hussein from Chicago, this is the employee, and this employer specifies who is the employer for this employee with this ID 99887744, and Apple is the employer for Mohammed Hussein. Okay, and then we also have salaries, and it also similarly it has ID 99887744 for each employee from the employees file, and it shows the salary for each employee. So the common thing between these files is the ID. So what we're going to do is we're going to loop over, or we're going to read each file, and we're going to put together all the data. We have ID, first name, last name, city, and then we're going to add Google as their employer, maybe after this one, after Houston here. And then we're also going to add salary for each employee. So basically we are adding employer for each person in here, and also the salary for each person in here. And then we're going to create some reports or export some files as required in this file. So basically we have to do 3 different files or 3 different steps here. So first we have to export a file that contains all the details. We have to have ID, first name, last name, salary, first name, last name, salary, and city, and all the details. So there should be one detailed file that will contain every information about every employee. Okay, and then we have to create another file for employer. So let's say if you go to employer, let's say Google has 2 employees, so we'll have to have a CSV file for Google with information for these 2 employees, 2233455. This one Michael, and there's another one working at Google, 8877 Fanny Pittman from Boston. So there will be a file for google.csv that will contain this one, whoever works in Google, whoever has Google as their employer. And then we'll have a file for Facebook and Apple and Amazon. And then the third one says CSV file for employees in each city. Just like we did for employer, we have to have a CSV file for each city. Let's say Houston. For Houston, we'll have to have a CSV file, which should be a CSV, houston.csv. And it should have like 2 people according to this file, Houston here and Houston here. And then we'll have a Miami file, miami.csv. It will have every employee that is based in Miami. So these 2. And then we'll have a file for Boston. There's 2 employees from Boston, and there's only 1 from Chicago. So basically 1, 2, 3, 4 files we'll have to create for each city. So this is a small project. I'm just going to go ahead and tell you exactly how I'm going to do it. I'm going to use the CSV module, and then I'm going to use a class. I've created a class here, and I've given it some default parameters, salary, employer, and then I have employee ID, first name, last name, city. So basically what I'm going to do here is I'm going to loop over the employee.csv file. Let me copy this. Copy. Okay. So this is what I'm going to loop over. This is the first file. I'll loop over this, and what I'll do is I will read each column. I'll read the ID for the first row, and then I'll read the ID, the first name, last name, and city, and I'll pass in and create an instance of this employee class. So I'll pass in ID, this one, and then first name is Fanny, and the last name is Pittman, excuse me, and the city as Boston. And I'll create an object, and then what I'll do is I'll create objects for all of these employees from employee.csv file, and then I'll save all those objects to a list. And once I'm done with the list, I'll go ahead and loop over the second file, employer.csv, and then I'll add the rest of the attributes like employer from the list. And then I'll loop over the third one, salary, and I'll add the salary. to this one. So initially when I read the first file, for each of these employees, the salary and employer will be none by default. Okay. I'll go ahead and start by declaring a list to save all the objects. I'll call it all objects. And then I'll go ahead and read the first file, which is employee.csv. To open employee.csv. I can do read, or it doesn't matter by default. I think it's read. Okay, let's just do that as file. And then I'm going to go ahead and pass this CSV to the reader, csv.reader. What it does is it's going to read this employee.csv file, and it's going to turn into an object which we can iterate over and get access to each row as a list. So if I go ahead and print the reader, it will be an object. Let me show you. Yeah, this is an object, but the good thing is this object is we can iterate over this object. Let me show you this. For each in reader, print each. So you'll see each one is a list. So each one is a row basically in the file. So the first one it's coming from here, employee.csv. Emily Lawson Houston. Okay. Michael Clark. Okay. So this reads, the reader reads the file, CSV file, and turns it into an object which we can iterate over and get access to each row as a list. So now since we have the first list right here, we are inside the loop. The each is the first one right here, the first list. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to extract some data so I can create an instance from the employee class. So let's do employee ID is equal to, so we have access to each list, and then the first index, this index 0 is the employee ID right here, and the next one is first name. First is equal to each number 1, and then last name is each 2, and then we have Houston, Miami. So the city, each go 0, 1, 2, 3. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an object, or I can just say employee is equal to employee class, and I'll pass in employee ID as employee ID. First is first, last name is last, and first name, last name, I have city as city. Okay, so what this will do is this will create an instance of this employee class, and what we'll do is after we create this instance, we will save this instance to the list, all objects, this list we created right here, and dot append emp. Okay. So we create an instance, and then I'll save it to the list. Let me go ahead and run this first. List index out of range, line 59, 5, 6, 7, 9. Something happened. Okay, so it says employee ID each 0, employee.csv. Okay, I think it read. What I'm gonna do is I'll go ahead and I'll show you what it did. Basically, I'll go ahead and show you this one, all objects. So it basically read all these rows, all these employees, and created objects. It created one object from this, and it saved it to the list. Second object saved to the list, third object saved to the list, and so on. Let me show you. For each in print each dot ID and each dot first, and then I'll show you the default values because we don't have access to the salary and employer it won't have the value. Each will not have a value of employer or salary. If I loop over this, you see, because we have access to ID, I'm just printing the ID, first name, and the salary. So we have ID, first name, salary, and it basically has city, last name, first name, ID. That's it. It doesn't have salary and employer right now because we haven't added that yet. It just says none right now for each of these objects inside this. So the next thing is I'll loop over the next file, which is salaries, or let's just do employer maybe. It doesn't matter, I can do any of those. So let me comment this out. This one is for read employees, and now I'll read employers, So the same way, I'll just go ahead and with open file name is employer, yeah, as file. And then what I'll do is start the reader, CSV dot reader. I'll pass in the file, and I have access to the reader. I can iterate over it. So I'll do for each in reader. Let me show you, print each, what it does. Now I have access to, let me comment this, access to the second file, this one, employers. I have ID, and then I have the employer. So as we know, we have saved these IDs to this one object. So what we'll do is basically we'll iterate over this object, and if the IDs match inside this object and the ID read in this CSV file, we'll add the Google or employer to that object. So let me show you, and you'll see how I do it. Okay, each in reader. So what I'll do is ID. So I'm not going to use ID. I think it's a keyword in Python. So I'll do ID underscore is equal to, I can do employee ID. Employee ID is equal to each, the index 0 on each row is the ID, and then employer is index 1. So what I'll do is I'll loop over the, okay, let me show you, for employer in all objects. Remember, we have objects saved in this, so I'll loop over them and I will check if the ID matches this employer's ID. If emp.id is equal to emp ID, this emp ID is coming from the list, this one, but these objects also have their own IDs we created earlier. So what I'll do is emp.employer is equal to this employer, just do employer, maybe lawyer. Okay, so what it does is it will read all the objects in the list and add employer to each of them. So I'll just go ahead and print now. Remember earlier you said there was no salary or employer, but let me just go ahead and print this now. I think it should have employers now. See, each we have ID, first name, last name, city, and now we also have employer with this. So the next thing I'm going to go ahead and read, do the same thing for this salary file. Okay. Comment this out. Read salary file. Okay, with open salaries, so in read mode as F or whatever. For each one in reader. Now let me print each here again. I'll show you. So it's going to show me this ID and salary, so that's, we get access to that. Okay, so what I'll do is the ID again is equal to each index 0, and then salary, I'll just say sal each one. Okay, and then I'll do is I'll loop over the other list for employee in all objects if employee.id is equal to id that we just created, we got from here. If they match, what we do is basically we add the salary to this employee in the list of objects we've created. Employee dot salary is equal to sal, this one right here. Okay, now if I go ahead and print this now, it should have every attribute: ID, first name, employer, and each dot salary. Yeah, it should have everything now. So we're pretty much done reading every file. So it has what were the attributes? So we're supposed to do first name, last name, salary, employee, employer, and city. Employer and city. And the only things missing right now is city. I think we already did that. Let's see if we have access to the city. Each dot city. Yeah, we have city as well. So we're pretty much done reading the files. Now the next thing is go ahead and export these files. So in order for me to do that, I'm gonna go ahead and comment this out, export section maybe. So this section from here down is for exporting files. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna just start opening a file. Let's say with open, let's say all details .csv. It will create a file because it doesn't exist right now. And I'll do write mode as file. Okay, and then I'll, instead of reader, I'm just gonna create a writer, csv dot writer, and I'll pass in file, file. Okay, so I'll show you writer. So we have access to writer. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna loop over this list of employees right here. Let me show you. Okay, this one right here. I'm gonna loop over this and then export the files. That's all. We're almost done. Writer is csv.writer. Okay, and then for each in this list we have all objects. What we do is a writer. So writer dot write row, and I'll have to pass in a row like this. This is a row, this is one row. So we have to pass in a list of comma separated values as a row. So let's say row, for example, row is equal to 1 2 3 4 and Hussein or Houston or whatever. So this is a row basically. If I pass in this row, you'll see it will create the file it created here. So this is what it created. I passed in, but we're not going to pass in the same data. So what we're going to do is we're going to read from this list and pass in different data every time it loops. So what I'll do is inside this I'll do each dot so in all details we're supposed to do first name, sorry, ID, first name, last name, salary, and employee in this order and ascending order. Okay, so let me put it here. Okay, sorry. Okay, each dot ID, each dot first, each dot last, each dot salary, employee, and city. Salary, employee, and city. Oh, it's doing this. Okay, order by ID, first, last name, salary, employee, and city. For last name, each dot salary, each dot employee, employer, and each dot city. I think that's it, and it will write to that file as a row. Each. I think that's it. Now we can check. Okay, we have access to all the details now. We have Emily. We can verify this by let's check this one. Mohammed 99, Mohammed Hussein 65,000, Apple, Chicago. 999 Mohammed Hussein, Chicago, and I should be working at Apple. 999 Apple, and I'm from Houston, and 65,000. Okay, perfect. So you were able to read the files, and then, but if I look at these files, the file that we just exported, details file, if you look closely, this is 1 2 5 8 7 5. These are not ordered. So according to the question, it says these should be on the top. It should be the employee ID smallest first in ascending order, customer ID or employee ID in ascending order. So basically we have to make sure so the first one is going to be the first one, smallest ID, and then the second one is this 2, and the third one is 5 5, fourth one should be 5 8, and then 7 7 8 8 9 9. So in order for us to do that, we're going to use the Python built-in sort method. Let me show you how to do that exactly. Okay, so I'll have to do that before I actually I'll have to do that on the list before I. So what I'm gonna do is basically this list that we have, I'm gonna sort them and keep them in the right order, and then it's gonna print in the right order. So what I'll do is all objects dot sort. It's in place sorting method in Python. It doesn't return anything, it just changes this list in place. Okay, so we specify the key. So we specify the key by key is equal to, let's say I have let me show you, key is equal to, let's say I say lambda function maybe. Key is equal to a lambda. I'll show you exactly what I'm doing. Lambda, let's say x dot id. Okay, so what it's going to do is it's just gonna, the key, we have to pass in the key to specify how do you want to sort it. So if I pass in key x dot id, so it's going to pass in the list, this one, and it's going to take each one in the list, and it's going to look for each dot id and sort it by that. So what I can do is I can also, instead of lambda, I can get a function like sorting key. It will return a key, and I'll pass in, let's say, x return x dot id, and instead of lambda I can just do sorting key, and I don't have to run it because it will run as, it will pass in each object from this class, and then it will run it automatically. But if I run this now, let's see if it works. I think it worked. Yeah, 1 2 5 8 7, it's working fine. And now I'll go ahead and I do the next file, which is going to be the second one here. Employer name, order, first name, last name, employer.sort. Okay, per employer. Okay, so let's say also let me go ahead and filter this with open. Open. Let's say let's just do measure. In order for me to do like I'm sorry, not measure, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. In order for me to do this for each employer, I'll have to have access to how many employers do we have. And I can do that by just iterating over the for. I'll have to be inside the indentation for each in objects. If each dot id in each dot employer in employer list, I'll create a list, employer list, like employer list is equal to an empty list. If each in employer list, what I can do is okay, what I'll do is each dot append employer list, I'm sorry, employer list dot append each dot employer. Okay, so this will give me access to all the Google, Facebook, Amazon. It will add them inside this list, and what I'll do is I'll create a set of employer list, and then list. So what the set will do is, because there's more than one employers, it will add Google, Facebook, Apple. So there's 2 apples. What I'll do is I'll create a set, and it will get rid of the duplicates, and then I'll convert it back to a list. The list is equal to, and if I print list now, should work, I think. There's list. List object has no attribute append. Yeah, Google, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, I have access to these. So what I'll do is okay, now I have this, and then with open well, I'll just loop over this employer list, I think. For each in employer list with open, let me just create a file name. I'll just have declare a file name, because we have to create Google dot, Facebook dot, so it has to be dynamic. So file name should be .csv, but it also has to be each dot okay, we have access to, let's say first is Facebook, Apple, so this is apple.csv plus .csv. Okay, and then I'll show you exactly file name, and it should be br. Okay, so it will print the file names, I think, facebook.apple.google. Okay, perfect. And then what I'll do is with open, I'll just pass in this file name. File name is right. If okay, oh wait, I have file name, and then I will loop over every object in this list. So I created let's say I have Apple, and I will check whoever has Apple in this, I'll have to add them to this apple.csv. So what I'll do is, where was I? No, employer, I had to be at the bottom. Okay. For employee in all What happened to all? All underscore object. Employer list. Okay, employer list, and then file name. Okay, and then for item in, let's say, all objects, print item. Let's see what it does. Okay, item. I'm not sure exactly what's happening. File name. It is working. Because of this, no. Oh, I see. So there was an indentation problem. There list objects. Okay, yeah. Sorry, there was an indentation problem. Kind of. So what I'll do is basically I'll loop over this employer list, and then I'll see if the. Let me show you. If this each is, let's say, Apple. If Apple is equal to the employer of this item dot employer is equal to each, then what I'll do is where is my writer? With open, this is a file name, read as if. Okay, what I'll do is if item, and then I'll create a row is equal to item dot what do we need here? Second one, first name last name employer. First name item dot first item dot first, item dot last, item dot employer. I think that's what we need. Employer. Okay, that's all we need. Okay, and then writer dot write row, and let's pass in row, and let's see if it works. I think it should work. No such file directory amazon.csv. Am I reading the file or writing the file? Writer. Oh, I'm supposed to write. Okay, mission closed file. Amazon. It says right to right row. Okay, with open. Okay, this has to be indented because it's happening inside this. Okay, now if I go to Google, I have Google, I have Apple. Okay, perfect. And Amazon, there's only one person working at Amazon. Okay, this is also done. And also if you look at sorting, this one, it says sort by employer name alphabetically. If I go to Apple, oh, this doesn't apply because each file has same employer, so it doesn't matter. And the last one is file for employee in each city. For each city, the same way we just did for employer, we have to implement the same logic for you have to sort the list first, just like this, and I'll have to resort it here, and this time I'll sort it by city. Okay, employer, and I'll call it city list, and then I'll just copy this code for each in duplicate code fragment city list. Yeah, it's fine. No, that's different. It's employer list and the city list. Anyway, so I'll loop over the city list this time. City list, and then I'll check. So city.csv file name, I'll open the file as f and write, okay, if item.city is equal to each is city basically, then I'll write it. And then let's say I'll have to have Chicago and Boston and Houston. Let's say Houston, there's 2 people, correct? Google. Okay, I was able to do it. And then it says ID, first name, last name, and city. So let's just add in the city we'll have to add item.id, first name, last name, and item.city. Okay, item.city. Okay, now if I go ahead and run this again, let's say Boston, okay, and the city the way they want it. And sorting for this one is supposed to be sorted by city alphabetically. Doesn't matter because if I check Houston, it only has Houston in it. So there's these are already sorted because there's no Houston, Chicago, or anything. It only has same city in each file. So this is done. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and put this code in my GitHub repository, and I'm gonna share the link to the repository in my description. You can go ahead and check the code, copy, clone it, and you can use it if you want. Thank you so much.